That's Ryan, and I'm refuting the claim that dieting makes people fat. All right, well, first of all, just the title of the claim alone is misleading. I mean, dieting makes people fat. I mean, if dieting made people fat, then, you know, it probably would, like, the overwhelming majority of the population would be fat. These people were already fat to begin with, and whether through genetics or because of their lifestyle choices, dieting didn't make people fat. A better title would probably been, you know, how dieting keeps people fat, or dieting improperly makes people fat, or it makes them regain weight. Her first claim was how there's the on and off mentality of losing weight, and how the majority of dieters eventually go back to the weight they had before. Basically, the biggest problem with her whole argument is lack of evidence. She doesn't really cite any sources to back up her claims. She just makes like a vague citation to Fox News and U.S. News, but we don't know like, how it applies to the argument, how it's relevant. This is how when people are done dieting, how they feel like it's appropriate to eat again, which causes them to gain weight back and makes them crave chocolate and other snacks from losing a large amount of food. The next claim is how dieting can hurt the body and not be a source of well-being. How suddenly reducing your intake will slow down metabolism, and also how it causes them to lose energy, and so they're too tired to exercise and all that. But you know, that does that happen all the time with all dieters, or is it only sometimes? Just kind of vague on that. And about her claim that the majority of dieters regain the weight back. A study published in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine looked at over 1,300 adults between 1999 and 2002, and it found that 2/3 of them were able to keep the weight off after they dieted, and some of them actually lost even more weight. Found that the ones who regained the weight, some common traits among them were that they spent lots of time sitting around in front of the TV and the computer. That when they lost weight, they lost it too quickly, too dramatically, and that they had reached their maximum weight more recently, and that most of them were Mexican American, so I guess that's a genetic thing. It said that the people who were able to keep the weight off were able to do it by eating low-fat diet, non-restrictive, and they watched their portion sizes. They ate breakfast every day. They were physically active most most of them walked for an hour every day, which and that most of them were able to find a routine and stick with it. Like they ate breakfast and they went out and exercised and they ate their low-fat diet and controlled the portion sizes of what they ate. And she doesn't really address like people who lose weight gradually, and she claims that that diets have fake foods, but what about dieters who don't eat those fake foods? Ones who eat real foods, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she just basically makes it out as if dieting is like is inherently evil and it doesn't work. But the truth is that if you diet properly and watch portion sizes and have a routine and stick to it and you're physically active, that dieting does work.
All right, Ryan, the main claim's labeled pretty clearly. The secondary issues aren't previewed in the body of the speech, but you do signpost them as you get to them, and I like that. The general approach that you're taking is this argument that says it's counterintuitive. In essence, what the advocate is saying is, boy, if you reduce the amount of food that you consume, if you reduce the amount of calories that you take in, if you diet, you're going to get fatter. That makes absolutely no sense from a scientific point of view. That's what you want to be talking about. Now, what you need to do then is distinguish the argument at this point and say, what they're really saying is that people fail to stick to their diets, and that's what causes these problems down the road. That there is a difference between dieting to lose weight for a particular purpose and dieting to control weight long term, and maybe there are some people who make the mistake of thinking, I've just, I'll drink some of these funny chocolate shakes, I'll stop eating regular food for a while, I'll lose 30 pounds, and then I'll go back to eating fast food stuff. You can't deny that that kind of stuff happens, but that's not dieting that causes that. It is, in fact, the people who are making the wrong decisions there. Because at the end of the speech, that's exactly the argument that you're making. I mean, everybody knows that the way to control your weight is a combination of two things. Reduce your food intake and exercise. You do those things, and you're going to be able to control your weight. There's not anybody who challenges those relationships. The question is how people try to manage or meet those particular goals. That's where the advocate is really making their criticism. They're saying that people are trying to take shortcuts in order to reach that first point. And I think that you do a good job pointing out some of the problems with those shortcuts. For example, on the first point, Gesundheit, you challenge the advocate's argument about whether or not people really do go back to the weight that they had originally. They didn't use the term, or maybe they did, but you didn't make a reference to it. It's sometimes referred to as yo-yo dieting, where you go down and then you go up, you go down, you go up, that sort of thing. You basically say they didn't present any evidence on this point. And there's no information that suggests that people lose weight and then gain it back, except that it's the advocate's assertion at this particular point. Now, if we had just heard the argument a few minutes before, we'd be able to tell that that was definitely the case. I believe that what you're saying is probably representative of the argument as you remember hearing it. there's a question about some vague references to some of the research that the advocate used. You need to explain what was missing. Point out that in the sources that they cited, I don't remember if it was Fox or CNN or some organization like that, did they provide any statistical information to support this? Did they provide any examples to support this? Was there any expert who offered testimony on this? The advocate didn't provide us with any expert testimony. The sources that they mentioned didn't give us any statistical information. They didn't cite any examples. That's the way you want to argue about this vague evidence. You want to be precise where the advocate is vague. Right? And be precise in saying, here's what's missing from the evidence that might have made it convincing. There was nothing that's convincing in this. It's a generic statement. It doesn't tell us how much. It doesn't tell us who. It doesn't tell us in what way these things are effective. That's, I think, a more powerful way of addressing that issue. On the next point, I thought that that's where you basically had the most useful piece of evidence that you had in your argument, which says that 2/3 of those people in this one study who engaged in this diet kept the weight off, which is exactly the opposite of what the advocate said. If we're going to make a generalization, the generalization should apply at least to most of the people. Here it doesn't even apply to 1/3 of the people that we're talking about. And I think that's the right argument to make on that particular point, and you did it pretty effectively there. And then the argument about, look, there are other reasons why people regain the weight that have nothing to do with it being particularly diet related. There are lifestyle issues, for instance. They lose the weight, but then they become inactive, which is a problem. That there are some genetic relationships, that people might have particular metabolisms that are related to genetic characteristics that they have that seem to be a contributor to that. I think that's okay to talk about as well. And then, like I said at the end, you basically do a good job summarizing what the argument is. You're a low-key guy. You're kind of quiet when you're speaking, but I think everybody understood what your arguments were, and that's what you need to have in the long run. All right, thank you. Are you guys playing paper, scissors, rock over here? What's going on? I keep seeing something clicking in the corner of my eye. Some kind of movement or something happening.
We're learning.
Morse code. It's not American Sign Language, it's American Slang Sign Language. Or something.
Yeah.
All right, Sky, we're going to have you next, please.